What if Meghan Markle isn't the victim we've been told, but the storm Buckingham Palace could never contain? Last night, Jon Stewart stunned millions as he called Meghan the Duchess of No Success live on air, reading leaked palace emails that expose a shocking side to the Duchess. Former royal staffers are breaking their silence, describing Meghan as manipulative, demanding, and emotionally unpredictable, claims so explosive they've reignited a global debate about her true character. Is this the ultimate takedown of a carefully crafted image, or just another ruthless media assault? Stay tuned as we uncover the leaked messages, the palace secrets, and Meghan's furious reaction that's rocking Montecito to its core. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The air was electric as Jon Stewart leaned forward on his chair, his voice sharper than usual. Millions of viewers tuned in, expecting a light-hearted evening filled with witty banter and harmless jabs. What they got instead was an unfiltered, blistering takedown of Meghan Markle that left the audience stunned and the internet ablaze. The words "Duchess of No Success" rolled off his tongue like venom, piercing through the carefully constructed image Meghan had spent years perfecting. It wasn't just another celebrity roasting. It felt like the opening shot of a cultural war. Within hours, hashtags like #Duchess of No Success and #Markle Exposed were trending worldwide, with Twitter users split between outrage and applause. But the real shockwave came moments later when Stewart, eyes glinting with determination, reached under his desk and pulled out a stack of printed emails. He began to read aloud. The emails, allegedly leaked from former Buckingham Palace staffers, painted a disturbing picture of Meghan behind closed doors, manipulative, demanding, emotionally unpredictable. Even Buckingham couldn't survive the Markle management style, Stewart quipped. The studio audience gasped. Meghan's supporters erupted in fury online. Her critics cheered. And somewhere in Montecito, California, Meghan Markle was reportedly seething, her inner circle scrambling to contain the fallout of what was rapidly becoming the biggest public relations disaster of her post-royal life. This was no ordinary tabloid scandal. It wasn't a rumor whispered in the back pages of a gossip magazine or a grainy paparazzi shot sparking speculation. This was a high-profile media figure, live on air, detonating a bombshell that threatened to dismantle the very narrative Meghan had worked so hard to build. For years, Meghan Markle had cultivated the image of a resilient, modern duchess, a woman of substance fighting against entrenched institutions, outdated traditions, and relentless media scrutiny. She was the feminist icon who had broken barriers in Hollywood, captured the heart of a prince, and bravely spoken her truth to the world. From her powerful interview with Oprah Winfrey to her TEDx talks and philanthropic endeavors, Meghan was more than a royal. She was a symbol of hope and empowerment for millions. But what if that wasn't the whole story? As Stewart's monologue spread like wildfire, questions resurfaced about Meghan's time in the royal family and the mass exodus of palace staff during her tenure. Were they victims of an outdated system resistant to change, as Meghan claimed? Or had they been casualties of an ambitious woman's ruthless pursuit of power and control? The leaked emails offered a rare and unvarnished glimpse into Meghan's alleged behavior behind palace walls. One staffer wrote of feeling emotionally broken after months of working under Meghan's impossible demands and sudden mood swings. Another described her as a master manipulator who knew exactly how to charm in public but terrorize in private. Yet another chillingly referred to her as the Duchess of Despair, a nickname that, according to multiple sources, stuck among palace aides long after Meghan and Harry stepped down as senior royals. For the first time, the cracks in Meghan's carefully polished armor were laid bare for the world to see. And while Stewart insisted he was simply exposing hypocrisy, critics accused him of misogyny and racism. Supporters rallied to Meghan's defense, pointing out how women, especially women of color, are often unfairly painted as difficult for showing the same traits celebrated in powerful men. But behind the noise, one thing was clear: the public was seeing Meghan Markle in a way they never had before. Her rise to fame had always been extraordinary. Born in Los Angeles to a black mother and white father, Meghan navigated the complex realities of race, privilege, and ambition from an early age. Her acting career, highlighted by her breakout role in Suits, established her as a rising star. Her marriage to Prince Harry elevated her to global superstardom and thrust her into the heart of Britain's centuries-old monarchy. But the fairy tale soon turned sour. In interviews, Meghan spoke candidly about her struggles with the press, mental health battles, and what she described as a lack of support from the royal family. Many sympathized. She became a lightning rod for conversations about racism, sexism, and the relevance of the monarchy in the modern world. Yet Stuart's revelations now forced people to reconsider. Was Meghan's narrative entirely true, or was it a masterful work of self-preservation and reinvention? In Montecito, sources claimed Meghan was furious. According to insiders, she felt betrayed. Not just by Stewart, but by former palace aides who, in her view, had violated her trust and privacy. There were rumors of legal threats against Stewart's network, furious phone calls to publicists, and a desperate scramble to regain control of the narrative. "She's livid," one source said. "This isn't just about her image, it's about her legacy. And she feels like it's slipping away." As the world watched the drama unfold, Meghan's team released a carefully worded statement dismissing Stewart's comments as baseless and defamatory. But the damage had been done. Clips of Stewart's segment were already viral, spliced into TikTok videos, dissected in YouTube breakdowns, and plastered across headlines from London to Los Angeles. This wasn't just a media firestorm, it was a cultural reckoning. For Meghan Markle, this moment could either be a temporary setback or the beginning of a devastating unraveling. Would she emerge from this storm stronger, silencing her critics and reaffirming her place as a modern icon? Or would Stewart's scathing critique mark the start of her downfall? One thing was certain, the world couldn't look away. And as the dust settled, the question lingered like a specter over Meghan's Montecito estate and the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace. Was Meghan Markle ever truly the victim, or has she been the villain all along? The story of Meghan Markle's rise to prominence reads like a modern fairy tale, or at least, that's how it was first presented to the world. In a culture obsessed with transformation and reinvention, Meghan emerged as a figure who seemed to embody both. Born on August 4, 1981, in Los Angeles, California, Meghan Rachel Markle grew up in an environment far removed from the pomp and ceremony of royal life. Her father, Thomas Markle, worked in television as a lighting director, while her mother, Doria Ragland, was a yoga instructor and social worker. As a child of a biracial marriage, Meghan experienced both privilege and prejudice, navigating spaces where she was sometimes too black and sometimes not black enough, as she would later describe in interviews. Those early experiences shaped her identity and her approach to the world. Meghan was a bright student, excelling academically and socially. She attended Immaculate Heart High School, a private Catholic girls' school in Los Angeles, before going on to study at Northwestern University. There, she double-majored in theater and international studies, spending a semester in Madrid and an internship at the U.S. Embassy in Buenos Aires. Meghan wasn't just another Hollywood hopeful, she was educated, worldly, and ambitious. After graduating in 2003, Meghan struggled to break into Hollywood. The entertainment industry's biases against actors of color meant she was often told she wasn't white enough for certain roles or ethnic enough for others. To support herself, Meghan took on various side jobs, including working as a calligrapher for wedding invitations and small business events. She even appeared briefly as a briefcase girl on the game show Deal or No Deal, an experience she later described as not fulfilling, but necessary. Her persistence paid off when she landed the role of Rachel Zane on the legal drama Suits in 2011. As the smart, ambitious paralegal-turned-attorney, Meghan became a fan favorite. The show's success brought her moderate fame, particularly among audiences in the United States and Canada, where it was filmed. During her years on Suits, Meghan also launched her lifestyle blog, The Tig, which featured her thoughts on food, fashion, travel, and wellness. The Tig wasn't just a passion project, it was Meghan's way of building her personal brand. She presented herself as relatable yet aspirational, a woman with impeccable taste and a commitment to self-care and social causes. It was during this period that Meghan began to establish her reputation as a humanitarian. She became a global ambassador for World Vision, traveling to Rwanda to advocate for clean water initiatives and worked with the United Nations on gender equality. Meghan seemed to be laying the groundwork for a post-acting career as an activist and thought leader. Her Instagram feed was carefully curated with images of yoga poses, inspiring quotes, and snapshots of her charity work. To her growing base of followers, she embodied the ideal of the modern, empowered woman. But Meghan's life changed forever in July 2016 when she met Prince Harry on a blind date arranged by a mutual friend. Their connection was instant. Harry, the younger son of Prince Charles and Princess Diana, had long been considered the royal family's wild child. In Meghan, he seemed to find a kindred spirit, someone who understood the pressures of public life yet offered a fresh, unconventional perspective. Their relationship progressed quickly, and by November 2017, the couple announced their engagement. The public reaction was a mix of fascination and skepticism. Meghan was hailed as a breath of fresh air for the British monarchy, an American divorcee, an actress, and a woman of color joining an institution long associated with tradition and uniformity. Newspapers lauded her as a princess for the 21st century, a symbol of progress in an age of cultural reckoning. For many, Meghan's entry into the royal family represented hope for a more inclusive and modern monarchy. Yet from the very beginning, there were signs of trouble. The British tabloids began to scrutinize every aspect of Meghan's life, from her family background to her wardrobe choices. Her father, Thomas Markle, became a lightning rod for controversy, giving interviews that embarrassed Meghan and strained their relationship. Meghan's half-sister, Samantha Markle, publicly criticized her in harsh terms, accusing her of abandoning her family. Still, Meghan and Harry's May 2018 wedding at Windsor Castle was a global event watched by millions. Meghan walked down the aisle in a Givenchy gown, her face serene, her steps measured. The ceremony blended British tradition with nods to Meghan's heritage, including a gospel choir and a sermon by Bishop Michael Curry. It was a day of pageantry and symbolism, a union that promised to rejuvenate the monarchy for a new era. In the early months of her royal life, Meghan dazzled the public. She undertook royal engagements with confidence and poise, often outshining more seasoned members of the family. Her style choices were dissected and emulated. The Meghan effect boosted sales for brands she wore, and her speeches on women's empowerment won praise. Publications crowned her the Duchess of Success, a moniker that underscored her ability to navigate the royal spotlight with apparent ease. But behind the scenes, a different story was unfolding. Reports of tension between Meghan and palace staff began to emerge. Anonymous sources described her as demanding and difficult to please. Rumors swirled of clashes with Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge, over everything from bridesmaid dresses to royal protocol. In late 2018, it was reported that Meghan and Harry would be moving out of Kensington Palace to Frogmore Cottage, fueling speculation of a rift between the Sussexes and the Cambridges. As Meghan's star rose, so too did the whispers of discontent within the royal household. Long-serving aides reportedly found her work style abrasive. One insider claimed Meghan wanted to hit the ground running and didn't understand the slower pace of royal life. Others suggested her Hollywood approach clashed with the monarchy's emphasis on hierarchy and tradition. Yet to the public, Meghan remained the picture of grace under pressure. Her charitable initiatives, like guest editing British Vogue and launching the SmartWorks clothing line for unemployed women, reinforced her image as a change-maker. She spoke candidly about her experiences with racism and the intense scrutiny of the British press, earning sympathy from many. But as Jon Stewart's revelations would later show, the Meghan Markle narrative wasn't as seamless as it appeared. While Meghan's rise to prominence seemed like the perfect trajectory of talent, determination, and charisma, Stewart argued that it was also marked by a relentless pursuit of control over her image and environment. According to Stewart, the Duchess of Success brand was carefully manufactured to mask deeper issues that palace aides were all too familiar with. The question now was whether the world would still buy into that narrative, or if the cracks in Meghan's armor had finally begun to show. The whispers began as little more than background noise, a stray comment here, an anonymous source there. But soon the murmurs about Meghan Markle's behavior behind palace walls grew into a deafening chorus. For the first year of her marriage to Prince Harry, Meghan had been praised in public as the breath of fresh air the monarchy needed. Yet in the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace and among the tight-knit staff who managed the daily life of the royals, a very different version of the Duchess of Sussex was quietly taking shape. It started with staff resignations. One aide, who had worked for the royal family for over a decade, suddenly handed in their notice just months after Meghan and Harry's wedding. Another followed weeks later. Then another. Within 18 months, a string of employees had quit or requested transfers to other royal households. The tabloids pounced, dubbing Meghan Duchess difficult, though no one could point to any official confirmation of wrongdoing. The palace maintained its traditional silence, adhering to its time-honored mantra, never complain, never explain. But silence couldn't keep the rumors at bay forever. By early 2019, royal correspondents began receiving tips about Meghan's challenging work style. One former aide described her as a hurricane who blew into meetings with big ideas and little patience for the monarchy's slower, consensus-driven decision-making. She's used to Hollywood, where you snap your fingers and things happen, the aide reportedly said. That's not how this institution works. Other staffers spoke of emotional volatility. In leaked WhatsApp messages, an employee wrote late at night, "I'm shaking with anxiety. She's yelling again. Nothing I do is ever good enough." Another aide recalled Meghan's capacity to be charming one moment and icy the next, describing it as walking a tightrope over a pit of knives. And then there were the emails. As Jon Stewart revealed on his live broadcast, a cache of internal palace communications was recently leaked to a journalist investigating Meghan's time as a senior royal. The emails painted an unsettling picture of a work environment defined by fear and exhaustion. One particularly damning message, dated November 2018, came from an aide who had been part of Meghan's staff since her engagement. "I have never encountered a more unpredictable or demanding principal in my career," the aide wrote. "She is highly skilled at presenting an affable face to the world, but in private, she is prone to mood swings and sudden outbursts. The office operates in a state of constant tension. Junior staff are terrified of making mistakes, and several have left citing stress-related illnesses." Another email from a different staff member referred to Meghan as the Duchess of Despair, a nickname that reportedly circulated among aides during her tenure. "She has this incredible ability to make you feel like you're failing her even when you've done nothing wrong," the staffer wrote. "It's exhausting." While some dismiss these accounts as little more than workplace gossip magnified by racism and sexism in the British press, others argued that so many similar stories from different people couldn't be ignored. Even Harry, according to one insider, had moments of frustration with his wife's interactions with staff. He adores her, but even he couldn't always defend her treatment of people, the insider claimed. Stewart's decision to read these emails aloud on live television was unprecedented. For years, the British media had hinted at tensions between Meghan and palace aides, but had never laid out such detailed allegations in such a public and unfiltered way. "The world has seen one version of Meghan Markle," Stewart said. "Tonight, you're going to hear another." As he read the emails, the audience reaction was a mix of gasps and uneasy laughter. Some clapped nervously, unsure how to respond. Others sat in stunned silence. The most explosive revelation came when Stewart read an email in which an aide accused Meghan of deliberately humiliating staffers during a tour of Australia in 2018. She reduced a senior staff member to tears after berating them over a minor scheduling error, the email read. She said, "I'm not here to babysit incompetence," in front of the entire team. It was mortifying. The Australia tour had been a public triumph, with Meghan and Harry drawing huge crowds and glowing press coverage. But according to these staffers, the public facade masked intense private tensions. One employee wrote, "It was like Jekyll and Hyde. She smiled and waved for the cameras, but backstage, she was furious and snapping at everyone." By the end of the trip, several of us were ready to quit. Palace officials refused to comment when contacted by journalists after Stewart's broadcast. Meghan's representatives issued a sharp statement denying the claims. "This is nothing more than a coordinated smear campaign to undermine the Duchess of Sussex," the statement read. "These allegations are categorically false and reek of misogyny and racism. Meghan has always treated her staff with respect and kindness." Yet the leaks ignited a fierce public debate. Were these accounts proof of Meghan's manipulative tendencies, as Stewart and her critics claimed? Or were they the result of entrenched palace staff resisting the changes and energy Meghan brought to a centuries-old institution? Supporters pointed out that Meghan had been subjected to racist abuse in the media from the moment her relationship with Harry became public. They argued that her confidence and ambition were being reframed as arrogance and cruelty because she was a woman of color in an overwhelmingly white and traditional institution. But others insisted the volume and consistency of the staff complaints suggested a deeper pattern. "Where there's smoke, there's fire," one commentator said on a popular British morning show. You don't get multiple people describing the same behavior without at least considering that some of it might be true. For former staffers, the memories remained raw. One junior aide, speaking anonymously, described experiencing panic attacks during her time working for Meghan. "I would get these 2 a.m. emails with impossible demands," she said. "If I didn't respond within minutes, I knew I'd face her wrath the next morning." Another aide who left after 6 months said Meghan could be inspirational, but also incredibly cold. She knows how to charm when she wants to, the aide said. But if you're not useful to her in that moment, it's like you don't exist. The allegations weren't entirely new. Reports of Meghan's demanding behavior had surfaced as early as 2018, but they had been overshadowed by her glowing public image and the narrative of her as a victim of tabloid cruelty. Now, with Stewart's platform amplifying these claims to millions of viewers, the balance seemed to be shifting. The palace remained silent. Harry remained silent. And Meghan, according to sources in Montecito, was devastated and furious in equal measure. As the debate raged online, one question hung over the scandal like a dark cloud. Were these the bitter grumblings of overworked staff in a rigid, outdated institution? Or had the world just glimpsed the real Meghan Markle for the first time? The studio lights dimmed slightly, casting a dramatic glow over Jon Stewart as he leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed and lips curled into a knowing smirk. What began as a routine episode of his late-night show was about to erupt into a cultural firestorm. Stewart was no stranger to controversy. His brand of sharp wit and unapologetic candor had made him a household name. But tonight was different. He wasn't just critiquing a politician or skewering a corporate scandal. Tonight, his target was Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, and his words would ripple far beyond the studio walls. It started innocuously enough. Stewart began by recounting Meghan and Harry's recent public appearance in New York, where the couple had been photographed leaving an upscale hotel, dressed to perfection, flanked by security. The tabloids had gushed over Meghan's designer outfit, her glowing skin, and Harry's attentive gestures. But Stewart, never one to take things at face value, raised an eyebrow. "Here's the thing about fairy tales," he said, his tone deceptively casual. "They're beautiful, but they're also fiction." The audience chuckled nervously. "Now, Meghan Markle," Stewart continued, gesturing as images of Meghan flashed on the screen behind him, "has carefully positioned herself as the symbol of empowerment, resilience, and grace under fire. And sure, she's faced challenges, no one's denying that. But what happens when the narrative doesn't line up with reality? What happens when the Duchess of Success starts looking a lot more like the Duchess of No Success?" Laughter erupted in the studio. Stewart paused for effect, letting the phrase sink in. "Yeah, I said it. Duchess of No Success. And before you clutch your pearls, let me explain why." What followed was one of the most incendiary segments Stewart had ever aired. He began by recounting Meghan's meteoric rise. Her transition from actress to duchess, her philanthropic initiatives, and her role as a modernizing force within the royal family. But then he pivoted sharply, highlighting controversies that had dogged her over the years, staff resignations, rumored clashes with Kate Middleton, and accusations of controlling behavior. Stewart's delivery was masterful. He mixed biting humor with moments of genuine gravity, drawing the audience into his narrative. But the real shock came when he pulled out a thick manila folder and dropped it on his desk with a loud thud. "Now, I don't usually do this," Stewart said, his voice lowering. "But tonight, I've got something that's going to blow this conversation wide open." The studio went silent. "These," Stewart said, holding up a sheaf of papers, "are leaked emails from former Buckingham Palace staffers. They were sent to a journalist investigating Meghan's time as a senior royal. And let me tell you, they don't paint a pretty picture." He began to read aloud. One email described Meghan as strategically warm but privately ruthless, claiming she berated staff in front of colleagues and demanded the impossible at all hours. Another referred to her as a master manipulator who could bring people to tears with a single glance. "She's like a Hollywood director, but instead of a movie, it's her life she's producing," Stewart quipped, eliciting uneasy laughter. But as the details grew darker, the humor faded. Stewart's tone became more serious as he read an email from a senior aide describing how Meghan allegedly reduced a team member to tears during a charity event planning session. She told her, and I quote, "If you can't handle the pressure, maybe you're not cut out for this," Stewart said, his voice edged with disbelief. "Imagine saying that to someone working 16-hour days for you." The audience gasped. Another email revealed Meghan's supposed disdain for royal protocols, with one aide claiming she had referred to certain traditions as archaic and idiotic. According to the email, Meghan allegedly said, "I'm here to change things, not to be shackled by them." Sounds inspiring, right? Stewart said. But not if you're the one working under her, apparently. The segment lasted nearly 20 minutes, a lifetime in television. By the end, Stewart had laid out a damning portrait of a woman who, in his words, wanted the crown without the constraints. As the cameras panned over the audience, their faces reflected a mix of emotions: shock, discomfort, and, in some cases, grim satisfaction. When the show went off the air, the internet exploded. Clips of Stewart's monologue began circulating on social media within minutes. The phrase "Duchess of No Success" trended on Twitter, accompanied by hashtags like #MarkleExposed and #JonStewartUnmasked Meghan. YouTube channels uploaded reaction videos dissecting every word, while podcasts debated whether Stewart had gone too far or if he had simply said what many had long suspected. For Meghan and Harry, the impact was immediate and devastating. Sources close to the couple described Meghan as incandescent with rage when she learned of Stewart's broadcast. "She feels utterly betrayed," one insider said. "This wasn't just a hit piece. It was character assassination on a global stage." According to reports, Meghan made frantic calls to her legal team within hours of the broadcast, demanding that Stewart retract his statements and issue an apology. But Stewart's camp stood firm. "This is not defamation," a representative for Stewart said in a statement. "This is commentary based on credible sources and documents that were verified by independent journalists." As Meghan's team scrambled to respond, the royal family remained silent. Buckingham Palace, true to form, declined to comment on the controversy. But behind the scenes, insiders suggested that some senior royals felt vindicated by the revelations. For years, they had endured accusations of racism and neglect from Meghan and Harry, particularly following the couple's explosive interview with Oprah Winfrey. Now, with Stewart's segment reigniting debates about Meghan's behavior, some within the palace reportedly felt it was only fair for the other side of the story to come out. In the days following the broadcast, opinion polls showed a noticeable dip in Meghan's approval ratings, particularly in the United States, where she had previously enjoyed strong support. Media outlets across the political spectrum weighed in, with some defending Meghan and others piling on. But perhaps the most significant fallout was cultural. For years, Meghan had been held up as a symbol of resilience against entrenched power structures. Now, Stewart's monologue forced people to question whether that narrative had been too simplistic. As one commentator put it, Meghan Markle was supposed to be the anti-establishment princess. But what if she's just another ambitious celebrity playing the game better than anyone else? The question hung in the air, unanswered. And in Montecito, Meghan was reportedly preparing her own response, one that, according to insiders, would shock the world and flip the narrative back in her favor. The fallout was swift and merciless. By the time the sun rose over Montecito the next morning, Meghan Markle's world was already spiraling into chaos. The elegant serenity of her California mansion stood in stark contrast to the storm raging outside its gates. Jon Stewart's live segment had detonated like a bomb in the middle of her carefully controlled reality, and no amount of media strategy or public relations spin could put the pieces back together. Not yet. According to sources close to the Sussex household, Meghan's reaction to Stewart's broadcast was nothing short of volcanic. The moment the Duchess of No Success clip began trending online, Meghan had reportedly been in the middle of a Zoom call with one of her Archewell team members. As her phone buzzed with notifications, her expression changed from calm professionalism to barely suppressed fury. She slammed her laptop shut and said, "I can't believe this. This is a direct attack," one insider revealed. She felt humiliated. It wasn't just about the words Jon used. It was the betrayal of someone like him, someone she thought was part of the progressive media circle that supported her narrative. Within hours, Archewell's headquarters was in crisis mode. Meghan's communications team held an emergency meeting to draft a response. Some advisors urged a calm, measured statement dismissing Stewart's comments as sensationalist entertainment. Others pushed for a more aggressive approach, including legal action against Stewart and his network for airing what they described as defamatory lies. But Meghan's own instincts leaned toward confrontation. She wanted to come out swinging, said a source familiar with the discussions. She said, "I will not let them rewrite my story. I've worked too hard for this." Harry, meanwhile, was reportedly torn between protecting his wife and urging restraint. "He hates seeing her like this," the source continued. "But he also knows that every move they make now will be scrutinized. He's trying to calm her down, but Meghan feels like this is war." The couple's friends and allies began rallying around them. Serena Williams, one of Meghan's closest confidants, posted a cryptic Instagram story hours after the broadcast. When they can't break you, they try to break your name. Stay strong, sis. Other celebrity supporters shared similar messages of solidarity, framing Stewart's monologue as yet another example of powerful women being vilified for their ambition. But in the digital court of public opinion, the tide was turning. On Twitter, hashtags like #MarkleExposed and #JonStewartWasRight dominated the trending list. TikTok users created countless videos dissecting Meghan's alleged behavior, while YouTube commentators debated whether Stewart had finally pulled back the curtain on a woman they believed had manipulated her way into the monarchy and then out of it. Even more damaging were the resurfaced stories from Meghan's time as a royal. Clips of former staffers speaking off the record in documentaries, previously dismissed as tabloid fodder, suddenly gained new weight in light of Stewart's revelations. She's not the person people think she is, one former palace aide had said in a 2021 interview. She's very good at playing the victim, but behind closed doors. It's different. These narratives, once drowned out by Meghan and Harry's highly orchestrated media appearances, now felt like puzzle pieces falling into place for her critics. Back in Montecito, Meghan's frustration reportedly boiled over during a phone call with one of her PR strategists. She kept saying, "They've been plotting this for years. First the palace, now Stewart. It's all connected," the source claimed. By the second day, Meghan's legal team had drafted a cease and desist letter addressed to Stewart's network. In the document, they demanded a full retraction and public apology, calling the segment a reckless, misogynistic attack that endangered Meghan's safety and mental health. But Stewart wasn't backing down. In a tweet that quickly went viral, he wrote, "When powerful people try to silence uncomfortable truths, you know you're over the target." The tweet garnered over 2 million likes within 24 hours. Meghan's emotional state deteriorated as the days wore on. Insiders described her as despondent, then furious, then despondent again. One friend, speaking on condition of anonymity, said Meghan had been crying for hours at a time and expressed regret at ever marrying into the royal family. She said, "I should have never trusted them, any of them," the friend revealed. She feels like she's been fighting the same battle from day one, and now it's all unraveling. Harry tried to shield her from the onslaught, limiting her access to social media and urging her to focus on their children. But Meghan couldn't stop herself from scrolling through the headlines. Every article, every comment, felt like a dagger. "She's obsessed with controlling her image," one royal commentator observed. But the more she tries to clamp down, the more people see it as proof that Stewart hit a nerve. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace maintained its usual silence. Behind the scenes, however, sources claimed senior royals were quietly pleased to see Meghan facing scrutiny. One insider put it bluntly, "This isn't their doing, but no one in the family is shedding tears over her PR nightmare." In the days that followed, Meghan began exploring options for a counteroffensive. Plans were floated for an exclusive interview with a sympathetic journalist, where she could refute the allegations point by point. Others suggested she make a surprise appearance on a major talk show to reclaim the narrative. "She's determined to turn this around," said a Hollywood producer who has worked with Meghan in the past. "She's not going to let Jon Stewart or anyone else write the final chapter of her story." But even as Meghan plotted her comeback, there were signs that the damage might already be done. Polls showed a significant drop in her popularity among American audiences, a demographic that had previously been her strongest base of support. Brands considering partnerships with Meghan reportedly grew skittish, fearing association with the controversy. "She's toxic right now," one PR executive said bluntly. "Nobody wants to get caught in the crossfire." For Meghan, the stakes couldn't be higher. This wasn't just about one television segment, it was about her reputation, her legacy, and the future of the brand she and Harry had painstakingly built. And as she sat in her Montecito mansion, staring at the endless stream of headlines on her phone, one thought reportedly haunted her more than any other. What if Stewart hadn't destroyed her image? What if he had simply revealed the truth? The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible to those who weren't looking closely. For years, Meghan Markle had enjoyed an almost bulletproof reputation among her supporters, a global base of admirers who viewed her as a modern-day heroine, battling outdated royal traditions in a ferocious press machine. But after Jon Stewart's explosive broadcast, something began to crack. It wasn't just the headlines that were changing. It was the tone of the conversation in places where Meghan had once been untouchable. Social media platforms, long a battleground of fierce debates about her character, started showing signs of fatigue among even her staunchest defenders. On Twitter, hashtags like hashtag Duchess of No Success and hashtag Markle Exposed weren't just trending, they were dominating. And while Meghan's loyal fan base tried to counter with tags like hashtag We Love Meghan and hashtag Stewart is cancelled, the sheer volume of criticism overwhelmed their efforts. TikTok videos dissecting Stewart's monologue gained millions of views, with creators breaking down the leaked palace emails line by line. One viral clip juxtaposed Meghan's polished public appearances with alleged quotes from the staff emails, painting a jarring contrast between her image and her behavior behind closed doors. But perhaps most telling were the comments from people who had once loudly defended her. "I wanted to believe she was the victim in all of this," one woman said in a YouTube video that quickly garnered 500,000 views. "But after hearing those emails, I don't know. I feel duped." On Instagram, lifestyle influencers who had previously championed Meghan's initiatives began posting cryptic captions about being careful who you idolize. Podcasts that had once hailed her as a feminist icon now debated whether she had weaponized that narrative for personal gain. The Meghan Markle myth, it seemed, was collapsing. For critics of Meghan, Stewart's revelations were a vindication. For years, they had argued that the Duchess was not the selfless humanitarian she portrayed herself to be, but a calculating opportunist who had manipulated public sympathy to her advantage. They pointed to her high-profile deals with Netflix and Spotify, her collaborations with luxury brands, and her penchant for speaking about privacy while courting media attention. Jon Stewart didn't destroy Meghan Markle, one commentator wrote in an op-ed. He simply held up a mirror. And what the world saw wasn't pretty. But Meghan's defenders were not ready to concede the battlefield. They accused Stewart of misogyny and racism, arguing that his segment perpetuated harmful stereotypes about ambitious women, especially women of color. "She's being punished for daring to speak out," one activist tweeted. "This is what happens when you refuse to stay silent and submissive." Yet as the days turned into weeks, even those arguments seemed to lose traction. New polling data showed Meghan's favorability ratings plummeting, particularly among younger audiences in the United States, a demographic that had previously been her strongest support base. In the UK, where her popularity had already been waning, the numbers hit a record low. Corporate partners were reportedly growing nervous. A skincare brand that had been in talks for a lucrative collaboration with Meghan suddenly paused negotiations. An Archwell Foundation event scheduled for the following month faced a wave of cancellations from high-profile guests. "It's like a dam broke," one Hollywood PR strategist observed. For years, Meghan controlled her narrative. Now, she's lost that control, and everyone is rushing in to fill the void. In Montecito, the mood inside Meghan and Harry's mansion was reportedly grim. Friends who visited during those tense days described Meghan as withdrawn, oscillating between anger and despair. She kept asking, "How could they turn on me so quickly?" one confidant revealed. She truly believed her connection with the public was unshakable. Harry, for his part, tried to reassure his wife that the storm would pass. But even he couldn't ignore the growing sense that something fundamental had shifted. The couple's inner circle debated strategies to regain public favor. One option was to lean into their philanthropic work, hoping that tangible acts of charity would drown out the noise. Another was to release a carefully crafted video statement, directly addressing the allegations and attempting to reframe the narrative. But there was a growing fear that no amount of spin could erase the image of Meghan as the Duchess of Despair, a nickname that had leapt from Stewart's monologue to the public consciousness almost overnight. Meanwhile, in the media, a new wave of investigative pieces began to surface. Former palace staffers, emboldened by Stewart's broadcast, reportedly began speaking to journalists on the condition of anonymity. One story in a prominent British newspaper claimed that Meghan had once thrown a cup of tea against a wall during a heated argument with an aide. Another alleged she had banned certain long-serving staff members from entering her wing of Kensington Palace because she didn't like their energy. Meghan's representatives furiously denied these claims, dismissing them as salacious fabrications designed to undermine a strong woman. But the stories kept coming, feeding a media frenzy that Meghan seemed powerless to stop. Even celebrities began to distance themselves. A high-profile actress who had once praised Meghan in an interview was asked about her thoughts on Stewart's revelations at a red carpet event. "I think it's complicated," she said carefully. "There are always two sides to every story." For years, Meghan had been viewed as a disruptor, a woman brave enough to challenge one of the world's most entrenched institutions. But now, the narrative was shifting. To her critics, she wasn't a disruptor. She was a manipulator. To her supporters, she wasn't a victim. She was a polarizing figure whose choices made her an easy target. And in living rooms across the world, ordinary people debated her downfall with a mix of fascination and fatigue. "I wanted her to win," one woman said in a BBC Vox Pop. "But now, I just don't care anymore. It's exhausting." In Montecito, Meghan reportedly stared at her phone for hours, scrolling through headlines and comments she had once sworn never to read. One particular tweet reportedly haunted her. It wasn't the palace that destroyed Meghan Markle. It wasn't the tabloids. It wasn't even Jon Stewart. Meghan destroyed Meghan. She read it over and over, unable to look away. Behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, the corridors that once hummed with quiet efficiency had become stages for whispered conversations and veiled glances. For centuries, the British royal household had maintained its reputation for discretion and loyalty. Staffers, footmen, aides, secretaries, and private advisors prided themselves on their ability to serve monarchs and nobles without ever letting a hint of scandal leak beyond the palace gates. But during Meghan Markle's tenure as a senior royal, that culture of stoic silence had begun to crumble. The leaked emails Jon Stewart read aloud on live television were only the beginning. They pulled back the curtain on a work environment that, according to former staffers, had been dominated by tension, fear, and exhaustion. And as journalists dug deeper, a troubling picture emerged of how Meghan's personality clashed with the deeply entrenched traditions of royal service. "She came in like a force of nature," said one former aide, speaking on condition of anonymity. "At first, it was exciting. There was this feeling that we were about to modernize the monarchy, to shake off some of the old cobwebs. But very quickly, the excitement turned into anxiety." The aides described Meghan as having an American-style work ethic that clashed with the palace's more measured pace. Unlike the royals who had grown up within the system and understood the value of hierarchy and deference, Meghan had no patience for what she reportedly called needless bureaucracy. "She wanted everything done yesterday," said another staffer. "Meetings at 7 a.m., emails at midnight, plans changing at the last minute. We were working 14-hour days trying to keep up." While some admired her drive and vision, others found her management style overbearing. Several staff members claimed Meghan could switch from charm to coldness in an instant. One aide recalled a meeting in which Meghan praised a team member's proposal, only to later berate them in private for missing the bigger picture. "She was strategic about when she turned on the charm," the aide said. In front of senior royals or cameras, she was warm and engaging. But behind closed doors, there were moments when she was downright brutal. Among staffers, Meghan reportedly earned the nickname the Duchess of Despair. It was meant as gallows humor, a way for exhausted aides to cope with what they described as a toxic work environment. One former employee described being summoned to Meghan's office at Kensington Palace late one evening. She was furious about a minor scheduling issue for a charity event. "I tried to explain, but she cut me off and said, 'I don't want excuses. I want results.' I left the room in tears." Another aide claimed Meghan dismissed long-serving palace staff as dead weight and pushed for younger, more dynamic hires who understood her vision. But Meghan's defenders argued that these complaints reflected an institution resistant to change. "She was an outsider in every sense," said one friend of Meghan's. "She wasn't British. She was an aristocracy. And she was a woman of color." Of course, some people were going to bristle at her presence and her methods. Even so, the exodus of staff from Meghan and Harry's household was difficult to ignore. By the end of their first year of marriage, at least 5 key employees had resigned or transferred out. Among them were 2 press secretaries and a private secretary who had served the royal family for over a decade. "It wasn't normal," said a palace insider. "People leave from time to time, but not in waves like that. It was a sign that something wasn't working." The tipping point, several aides claimed, came during Meghan and Harry's 2018 tour of Australia, Fiji, Tonga, and New Zealand. Publicly, the trip was hailed as a triumph. Crowds lined the streets, and Meghan's speeches on women's empowerment drew widespread praise. But behind the scenes, tensions reportedly reached their breaking point. "She was under a lot of pressure, and it showed," one staff member recalled. There were reports of shouting matches, last-minute changes to schedules, and Meghan expressing disdain for royal protocols she felt were archaic. According to one leaked email, Meghan was overheard telling an aide, "I'm not here to play by their rules. I'm here to rewrite them." For some, that attitude was inspiring. For others, it was deeply unsettling. "There's a way things are done in the royal household," explained a former senior advisor. "It's not about stifling innovation, it's about maintaining order." Meghan didn't understand that, or she didn't care to. Harry, caught between his wife and the institution he had served his entire life, reportedly tried to mediate. He wanted to protect her, said a source. He saw how much the media attacks hurt her, and he felt the staff should be more supportive. But it was difficult when so many of them felt they were being mistreated. The cultural differences between Meghan and the palace also played a role. Meghan, who had spent years in Hollywood and philanthropy, was accustomed to speaking her mind and expecting swift action. The palace, with its rigid hierarchy and centuries-old traditions, operated at a glacial pace. She thought she was coming in as a partner, an equal, one aide said. But in the royal family, even Harry isn't an equal to the Queen. That's not how it works. Yet even among those who sympathized with Meghan's struggles, there was acknowledgement that her approach often made things worse. She could have been a transformative figure for the monarchy, said a former palace press officer. But she alienated too many people too quickly. It became us versus them, and that's not sustainable in an environment like the royal household. By the time Meghan and Harry announced their decision to step back from royal duties in January 2020, the relationship between the couple and the palace staff was described as beyond repair. For some aides, their departure was a relief. "We were all burnt out," one said. "It felt like we were walking on eggshells every day." But for Meghan, the experience left deep scars. She would later speak of feeling unsupported and even targeted by the institution she had married into. In her interview with Oprah Winfrey, Meghan suggested that some staff members had leaked negative stories about her to the press. Now, with Stewart's broadcast resurrecting old wounds and bringing new allegations to light, the question remained, were these staff accounts exaggerated, the bitter words of employees unwilling to adapt to change? Or were they the first honest glimpses into a side of Meghan the world wasn't meant to see? As one former aide put it, she wanted to change the monarchy, but in the end, it changed her, and not for the better. The backlash against Jon Stewart was as fierce as it was immediate. Within hours of his now infamous segment on Meghan Markle, Stewart's name dominated headlines alongside hers. Critics accused him of crossing a line, of abandoning his trademark wit and satire for something colder, sharper, something that felt like a personal attack. But as the firestorm raged, Stewart didn't retreat. Instead, he doubled down. In a follow-up episode of his show, Stewart addressed the controversy head-on. He didn't offer an apology. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he leaned into his decision with the confidence of someone who believed he had uncovered a truth too important to ignore. "Look," Stewart began, staring directly into the camera. "I know some people are upset. I know I touched a nerve. But let's get one thing straight. This isn't about tearing down a woman for being ambitious. This isn't about race. It's about holding powerful people accountable, no matter how carefully they've curated their public image." The studio audience erupted in applause, though their cheers were tinged with an undercurrent of unease. Stewart went on to explain why he felt compelled to air the leaked emails from palace staff. He framed it as a matter of public interest, arguing that Meghan and Harry had deliberately positioned themselves as global thought leaders, leveraging their royal titles for influence and commercial success. "When you put yourself on the world stage and say, 'Look at me, I'm different, I'm better, I'm the voice of the voiceless,' then people have a right to ask questions," Stewart said. "And if you've left a trail of hurt and chaos behind you, don't be surprised when it comes back to haunt you." The segment quickly went viral. Clips of Stewart defending his actions were shared millions of times on social media. Supporters praised him for his courage, calling him one of the few media figures willing to challenge Meghan's carefully constructed narrative. But detractors weren't buying it. Prominent activists and celebrities accused Stewart of hypocrisy. "Why is it always women who get labeled difficult for demanding excellence?" one Hollywood actress tweeted. Would Jon say the same thing about a male CEO or a prince born into privilege? Others argued that Stewart's segment fed into existing racist and sexist stereotypes about Meghan. "He's not holding her accountable," wrote a columnist in The Guardian. "He's participating in the same old character assassination we've seen since the day she married Harry." In interviews, Stewart pushed back against these criticisms. He pointed out that his focus wasn't Meghan's gender or race, but her alleged treatment of those who worked for her. "If these were just one or two disgruntled employees, maybe you could dismiss it," Stewart said on a podcast. "But we're talking about multiple people, over months and years, telling the same kinds of stories. Are they all lying?" The ethical debate over Stewart's actions dominated the news cycle for days. Was he shining a light on hypocrisy and protecting vulnerable staffers from a powerful figure? Or was he exploiting Meghan for ratings, feeding a media ecosystem that thrived on tearing women down? Philosophers and media experts weighed in. Some argued that Stewart had every right to expose the allegations, given Meghan's prominence. She isn't a private citizen anymore, one media ethicist said. She's a global brand. Brands get scrutinized. Others disagreed. This wasn't journalism, countered a former royal correspondent. This was theater, and it could have real consequences for Meghan's safety and mental health. Behind the scenes, Meghan's team debated whether to escalate their legal threats. Archwell's lawyers drafted a second letter to Stewart's network, accusing them of malicious intent and warning of potential lawsuits for defamation and emotional distress. But legal experts were divided on whether Meghan's case would hold up in court. She'd have to prove not just that the claims were false, but that Stewart knew they were false and aired them anyway, one attorney explained. That's a high bar. Meanwhile, Stewart's ratings skyrocketed. The controversy, far from damaging his career, seemed to breathe new life into it. The show saw a surge in viewers, and streaming platforms rushed to acquire the rights to his back catalog. For Stewart, it was vindication. "I didn't set out to destroy Meghan Markle," he said in a later interview. "But I do think we need to stop treating her like she's beyond reproach. She's not a victim. She's a player in a very big, very public game. And the people who got trampled along the way deserve to have their voices heard too." But for Meghan, Stewart's refusal to back down was infuriating. According to sources, she viewed his comments as a betrayal, particularly given their shared history of supporting progressive causes. She feels like he's weaponizing the very values he claims to stand for, one insider said. It's not just about what he said, it's about how gleefully he said it. As the debate raged on, one question loomed large: had Stewart done the right thing? Or had he unleashed a storm that no one, least of all Meghan, could control? For now, Stewart remained defiant. But in Montecito, Meghan and Harry were reportedly plotting their next move, a counterstrike that could either silence their critics or plunge them even deeper into controversy. In the sunlit halls of her Montecito mansion, Meghan Markle paced back and forth, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The morning air smelled faintly of lavender from the garden outside, but there was nothing calming about the energy inside the house. The world was watching, dissecting every move, every word, every flicker of emotion on her face. Jon Stewart's broadcast had done more than wound her reputation. It had lit a fire under a global conversation that refused to die down. For Meghan, the question wasn't whether she had been targeted. In her mind, there was no doubt about that. The real question, the one that kept her awake at night, was how to fight back. Her team of advisors was split. Some urged her to go quiet, to ride out the storm and let the news cycle move on to its next target. "They'll get bored soon enough," one publicist said. "You've been through worse." But Meghan wasn't convinced. "She doesn't want to be seen as a victim," said a close confidant. "She wants to take back control of her narrative, to show people she's not afraid of Jon Stewart or anyone else." To do that, Meghan knew she needed a plan. And it couldn't just be another carefully worded statement or a glossy Instagram post. This required something bigger, bolder, something that would reassert her place on the world stage and remind people why they admired her in the first place. The first idea floated was an exclusive interview with a trusted journalist. Meghan had used this strategy successfully before, most famously in her explosive 2021 sit-down with Oprah Winfrey. But some of her advisors warned that another high-profile interview might backfire. "Every time you speak, you give your critics more ammunition," one PR strategist cautioned. Right now, silence could be your strongest weapon. But silence had never been Meghan's style. Another option was a public appearance, something unexpected, like a surprise visit to a women's shelter or a charity close to her heart. The goal would be to remind the public of Meghan's philanthropic side, to shift the focus away from palace gossip and back onto her causes. "She's always been at her best when she's connecting with people directly," said one former aide. "If she can get out there and be seen doing good work, it might change the conversation." But Meghan worried that any public appearance would be overshadowed by the controversy. Paparazzi would shout questions about Stewart's broadcast, headlines would frame her as on the defensive, and critics would accuse her of using charity as a PR shield. And then there was the nuclear option, legal action. Meghan's lawyers were already exploring potential lawsuits against Stewart's network, alleging defamation and emotional distress. In theory, a courtroom battle could clear her name and force her detractors to retract their statements. But it was risky. Once you go to court, you open yourself up to discovery, warned a legal expert consulted by the Sussex team. Emails, messages, even testimonies from former staff could all be subpoenaed. Are you prepared for that? For Meghan, the thought of former palace aides taking the stand was chilling. Some of their accusations had already made it into the public domain. What else might they reveal under oath? Harry, for his part, urged caution. He had watched his mother, Princess Diana, become engulfed in media scandals during her lifetime, and he was determined not to let history repeat itself. He's worried this could spiral out of control, said a friend of the couple. He wants to protect Meghan, but he also thinks they need to pick their battles carefully. But Meghan was restless. Waiting for the storm to pass felt like surrender. And surrender was not in her vocabulary. Behind the scenes, Archewell's media team began crafting a strategy. The plan involved a multi-pronged approach: subtle but powerful Instagram posts highlighting Meghan's charity work, quiet outreach to journalists known to be sympathetic to her, and preparations for a possible podcast episode addressing the controversy in Meghan's own voice. She wants people to hear her side of the story, an insider revealed. But she also wants to do it in a way that feels authentic, not staged. There was talk of inviting Stewart to a private conversation, perhaps even on her podcast. Meghan believed that confronting him directly could flip the narrative, showing her as calm, reasonable, and willing to engage in dialogue. It would be a bold move, said one media analyst. But it's a gamble. If she comes across as defensive, it could make things worse. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry's allies began quietly testing the waters. Articles began appearing in friendly publications, framing Stewart's broadcast as part of a larger pattern of powerful women being vilified for their ambition. This isn't about Meghan Markle, read one op-ed in a leading American magazine. It's about how society treats women who refuse to stay in their assigned lane. Social media influencers, many of whom had been silent in the immediate aftermath of Stewart's broadcast, began speaking out. One posted a video saying, "We should be lifting women up, not tearing them down." Meghan doesn't owe anyone perfection. But for every supportive post, there were dozens more mocking her as the Duchess of Despair or sharing memes of Stewart's Duchess of No Success tagline. It became clear to Meghan's team that changing the narrative would be an uphill battle. "She's lost control of her story," said one royal commentator. "The question now is whether she can ever get it back." In private, Meghan wrestled with her next steps. She knew that whatever she did, the world would be watching and judging. "She wants to fight," said an insider. "But she's also exhausted. She's been fighting for years. At some point, she has to decide, how much more of herself is she willing to sacrifice for this?" And so, as the sun set over Montecito, Meghan sat in her home office, staring at a blank notebook. On the first page, she had written 2 words in large, looping script. "My story." The question was whether she would tell it on her terms, or whether the world had already decided how it would end.